Good afternoon, Peace Corps volunteers in the Dominican Republic, I believe is where I'm speaking today. My name is Jason Cochran. I'm a former Peace Corps volunteer in Panama, also former staff in Panama. I was DPT in Paraguay as well as Colombia. I worked with two members of your staff, Tess De La Rios and your country director, Kirsten, as well throughout my career. But as with all things, especially with Peace Corps, I had to move on because of the 5-year rule. And right now I am a branch chief with the Foreign Agriculture Service in the Office of Capacity Building and Development, where I oversee activities in the food safety capacity building area, which I'll talk about later. Tess has asked me to talk to you about non-competitive eligibility today because of my experience in hiring many Peace Corps volunteers, former Peace Corps volunteers that way, including one from the Dominican Republic. What is non-competitive eligibility? Well, when you fill out your description of service, you're going to include in the description of service this paragraph, pursuant to Section 5F of the Peace Corps Act 22 U.S.C. 2504F, as amended, any former volunteer employed by the United States government following his or her Peace Corps volunteer service is entitled to have a period of satisfactory Peace Corps service credited for purpose of retirement, seniority, reduction, and forced leave, and other privileges based on the length of federal government service. Peace Corps service shall not be credited toward completion of the probationary or trial period of any service required for a career appointment. It's a lot. In English, basically what non-competitive service is, and what I'm going to explain to you a little bit, is a hiring mechanism to put return Peace Corps volunteers to the front of the line in the hiring process. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to explain the nuances of this non-competitive eligibility because it's a little bit confusing for you, but definitely for employers. And so if you can find employers in the federal government that understand non-competitive eligibility, great, because that's going to get you a foot in the door with the position. So what is it? It's a hiring mechanism offered to return Peace Corps volunteers for up to 1 year after their service that essentially moves them to the front of the line in the hiring. So, if there is a job announcement open, or going to be open, or just recently closed, all you have to do is submit your resume and your description of service to the Human Resources, and they'll get you on what's called the CERT, or the list of people to be considered for employment. So how does this work? Let's say you're networking with someone who's going to have a job opening in a couple weeks. Well, all you have to do is give them your resume and your description of service. They'll submit to the Human Resources and they can interview you and hire you before the job even opens. Huge advantage. Once the job is open, then it gets a little tougher because then you get on the list with everybody else applying for the job. And if there's a veterans on it, they have to get hired first, and etc. But also, if you see that a job's open and is just closed and you did not apply for it, you can also submit your resume and your description of service to HR and be considered to be on that list. Finally, once the job announcement closes, there's a 90-day window where you can still get your resume and DOS in and be considered for the job. Now that actually works because a lot of times with these job announcements that we're hiring for, we may not have all the candidates we need once it closes, or maybe people have turned the job down or stuck in security clearance. And so this has actually happened to us a week ago where we need more candidates. And so I put out a quick call to a few people I knew with Peace Corps, and they sent me their DOS and they're being considered. So the biggest advantage to non-competitive eligibility is before the job is announced and after the job closes, because then you can be considered without actually having to go through the entire process of applying for the job and waiting for HR to get back to you, etc., etc. So what it is, but the other things you got to consider too, what it is not. It does not guarantee you a job. Only veteran status can do that. It does not guarantee you an interview either. You must be qualified for the position. If you're not qualified for the position, the non-competitive eligibility will not be granted, and you won't get, and even if you are, it doesn't mean that you will get an interview. Finally, it is also up to the agency to grant non-competitive eligibility. It's a pretty gray area. Some agencies get it completely, like our agency. Peace Corps is another agency that totally understands it. Department of Education, as I understand, does as well. Department of Labor has a lot of former Peace Corps volunteers. Other agencies, not so much. And that's where we try to educate them about how it is an advantage to employers to hire Peace Corps volunteers. What can you do to get that job? Well, network. It's a dirty word in a lot of circles, but it's important. It's how people get hired. It's who you know. You can have a nice resume, but everybody has a nice resume. But if you do the face to the name, it helps immensely. Go to job fairs. There's a lot of Peace Corps sponsored, third goal sponsored job fairs going on. There's at least 2 a year in the Washington, D.C. area, and they also have them across the country. Go to job fairs. Bring your description of service. Bring your resume. Generally, the employers that are at job fairs, especially with the U.S. government, know what this non-competitive eligibility thing is all about. Go to them. Get the word out. And you can even get interviews. I've known people get hired literally from the job fair. Also, find out which agencies really understand non-competitive eligibility and focus your efforts there. Like I said, the Department of Agriculture, Foreign Agriculture Service, we understand it. Department of Education, Peace Corps, USAID is another one. The ones that know non-competitive eligibility actually actively look for it to do their hiring because it's just easier for us. If people don't understand it, explain it to them. Explain to them that this is a hiring mechanism that allows them to circumvent the entire process or get more qualified candidates quickly, and have them talk to their HR and work out how to get your name considered. And then finally, the other key thing is, as it was said before, you get 1 year of hiring of non-competitive eligibility. That can be extended in certain situations. Most common is grad schools, military service. Also, at Peace Corps response, you can also possibly get that extended, but confirm that. Before you accept your Peace Corps response position, make sure that they'll be able to extend your NCE. What does that mean? Let's say you're in grad school for 2 years. You finish your service in June of 2019. You have until June 2020 before it expires, but if you go to grad school in September, only 3 months have expired. So then you still have 9 months from the end of your grad school. So you're in grad school for 2 years, September 2019 to September 2021. In September 2021, you have 9 months of non-competitive eligibility left. So be aware of that, research it before you go in, because what you don't want to do is do something that you think has it extended and then you find out it expires and you can't get a job. With me so far? Good. Also, the other thing you need to do, as I mentioned before, you have to qualify for the position. So most of the jobs, entry level, all of you guys are qualified, but the biggest problem I see is you don't write your resumes to the position. And so even though I know you're qualified, according to the HR person that's looking strictly at the resume, they don't see the keywords on that resume. So look up the job announcements. Write your resumes to the job announcement. Then you can be considered. And also, it doesn't help to follow up with the HR people either. Every job announcement has an HR contact. Follow up with them. Talk to them. A lot of them actually will respond back to you and are pretty friendly people too. And the other thing too, if you've done your networking and you know the hiring manager, have them advocate for you with the hiring office. A lot of times I'll do that, where I say, okay, have you looked at these 5 people that I sent you that I talked to? And they'll say, okay, yeah, we're going to consider them. Or if they haven't considered them, they'll tell me why, so I can go back to you and give you the feedback on what you have to do with your resume. Finally, why do people like hiring Peace Corps volunteers? You hear it all over, all the time. I heard it when I was volunteer. People love Peace Corps volunteers, but then you get out and the job search can be a little bit slow. You got to give that time. But people like Peace Corps volunteers, why? Y'all are adaptable. You're trainable. You have a great attitude. You've been through 2 years of probably the worst and rewarding job conditions you're ever going to have. So anything you're going to go through after that, it's kind of cake. You've been through it before. You've seen the real world. You interject a reality into these agencies that they may not have. You're team players, fun to be around, speak multiple languages, and have very strong cultural competencies. Also, a lot of government agencies have a lot of Peace Corps, returned Peace Corps volunteers in the building already. And you know what? We all like to tell our stories. And you also know what? Nobody likes to hear the stories. But if you're with a bunch of RPCVs, we can tell each other stories. So we kind of like to have each other around because we know what it's been through, and we generally like being around other return Peace Corps volunteers. So don't ever doubt what you have and what you bring to the table as a Peace Corps volunteer. Make sure you get that clear and say it loud and proud in the interviews, because everybody that I've talked to across many agencies, private sector, love having Peace Corps volunteers on their staff. That's non-competitive eligibility in a nutshell. Let me just briefly go over what we do in my agency. As I said, we're the Foreign Agriculture Service, which is essentially as a trade agency. How do we get our American agriculture products out to the rest of the world? Now, as you know, in going through your 2 years, almost 2 years of experience, it's complicated, the cultural issues that you learn and adapt to in your country. So it's not enough for us to just say, hey, Dominican Republic, buy our corn. Well, Dominican Republic might say, well, yeah, but you don't want to buy our mangoes. And so what we do in our division is we go in and say, oh, well, we don't want to buy your mangoes because they're not meeting our rules to get into the country. And they'll say, oh, well, since you guys are making up rules, we're going to make up rules about why we can't buy your corn. And so what we will do is we'll go in and work with the governments and inspectors and local universities, and we'll help them understand our rules and understand where they come from and help them so they can access our market. And then and this is where the development comes in handy, is we're able to help understand and manage the cultural and the trade issues that may come up through the soft diplomacy, and then through our capacity building of them understanding how to get to our markets, we'll say, okay, now we've helped you, what are you going to do for us? And so it's a pretty fun job in the sense of you're really understanding how agriculture gets around the world and how trade works. And so we do a lot of work in countries that we say economies in transition. Countries that are just about ready to get into the trade market. And so what we really push for is countries to adopt science-based decision-making policies. Because that's, as the U.S., we base it on science, whereas Europe is a little not so much on science. And so it's this big battle right now. And so we go out into countries and try to eliminate these trade barriers through capacity building. Examples. In the Dominican Republic, we've worked a lot with their customs union, helping them to adapt science-based inspections, science-based policies, and that's actually helped them open up their markets to lamb, for example. They just signed a deal with us that they're going to allow our lamb to get into the country. Funny, who knew? The other thing is we work with them and help them understand the Food Safety Modernization Act, which basically we changed completely how we're inspecting food coming to the United States. And so we went to their to their producers, their inspection agents, so that they understand that when they ship those mangoes to the United States, they're not going to get rejected, because that's a lot of money investment going on. And so that's a lot of work what we've done in the Dominican Republic. Globally, we work what's called maximum residue limit, which is what is the highest amount of pesticides and herbicides that can be on product before they start to get it in the range of not being safe. If they're above that, they get rejected. As you guys know, especially if you've worked in agriculture, there's always change in the agrochemicals, and so through that work, we're helping to identify what are the maximum residue limits that are in the safe range for products. Fall armyworm, which is an invasive species attacking Africa right now, so how to mitigate that. I've done a lot of work in Vietnam, which was called the catfish rule, which basically Vietnamese catfish, we changed how we're inspecting them. Vietnam got really mad at us and held up a bunch of our trade issues, so we're working with the Vietnamese government to help them understand our rule and open up their markets to our products. As a result, we also work with the World Trade Organization, other standard-setting bodies, help them understand our point of view of using science-based decision-making and hopefully influence their standards to follow science. And then finally, there's Food for Peace, Trade Facilitation Agreement, among others. I've probably used up more time than I needed right now, but I hope that you have received an overview of what non-competitive eligibility is and how it helps you, benefits you as a Peace Corps volunteer looking for work. And then finally a little bit about what Foreign Agriculture Service in our division does. If you have any further questions, I'm happy to take emails. Just ask Kirsten or Tess for my contact information, and please let me know. We are coming out of our hiring freeze. We hopefully will be looking for more and more positions in the coming months. So if you're interested in working in Washington, D.C., interested in working for the Department of Agriculture, send me an email. Send me a resume, your DOS, and if we have positions, we'll definitely try to get you on the rosters. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of your service.